I hope everyone enjoyed their refreshments and whatnot. I was very disappointed. I was promised some samosas. So was my mother. It's the only reason she came, and she didn't get any. So she's gone home. It's very supportive like that. But yeah, we're going to have another panel kind of exploring some of the themes from earlier. So I'm just going to quickly introduce our panellists before they speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll do kind of a lengthy Q&A. So first, we've got Suresh Grover, who's the director of the Monitoring Group and founder of the Southall Monitoring Group. We've got Sita Bolani, who's a lecturer at King's College London in contemporary literature and culture. I've got David Renton, who's a barrister, a historian, and author of Never Again, Rock Against Racism and Anti-Nazi League, which is in front of us. It's a bit of a jack of all trades by the sounds of his bio. Master of all of them, probably. Then we've got Avtar Brah, who's a professor emerita here at Birkbeck, University of London. So we're going to start with Avtar.
Okay, thank you. Is this on?
That's good.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you very much. When I think about Southall in the late 70s, two abiding memories of the period haunt me. As a research student at Bristol University, I came to Southall in 1976 to carry out interviews with 15-year-old pupils in schools and their parents about their perspectives on a variety of social issues, including their life experiences in Southall. So I was in Southall during the summer when Gurdeep Singh Chaggar was murdered on 4th June 1976. The grief in the community was deep. According to newspaper reports, over 1,000 mourners attended Chaggar's funeral. The established community leaders favored a cautious approach to dealing with the incident. However, young people were restless and seemed disenchanted with what they saw as the softly approach of the community leaders. They wanted direct street action. Propelled by anger and defiance, a new generation of radical young activists and campaigners were born. They acted peacefully when required, but were prepared to undertake militant action when the occasion demanded. By 1977, my research funding came to an end, and at the end of the year, I moved to London to take up a job at the National Association for Asian Youth in Southall. Thus, when on 23rd April, the racist and fascist National Front came to Southall Town Hall to hold an election rally against the advice of the Southall community to the local council to keep them away, I was based in an office close to the town hall. What started out as a peaceful protest by the local community and our supporters and our supporters at the National Front outrage turned very ugly and violent as a very large-scale police operation, and we know about that, got underway. Approximately 700 individuals were arrested, and 345 were charged and tried in court. We were involved in defense campaigns which followed. The day, as we know, the day progressed, Blair Peach was killed by injuries to his head, sustained when he was hit by police. I remember going with Oliver New, a local resident and political activist, to Ealing Hospital late that evening. We had heard that Blair Peach had been hurt, but did not know how seriously. As we reached the hospital, we came across Celia Stubbs, his partner, and some other individuals who told us that Blair Peach had passed away. I shall never forget that moment and the mayhem of that day. But throughout, and I think people mentioned this morning, there was solidarity and unity among people with different ethnic, religious, and class backgrounds. There was diversity of views, of course. We didn't all agree with one another. But these were views about political strategies, differences about political strategies. But it was to do with politics rather than ethnicities. And I think that's important. We don't all have to think alike. But it depends on the kinds of differences that we actually are struggling around. I wish now to say something about women's activism. Asian women were active in politics from the early years of post-World War II Asian migration, though this was not always recognized in narratives of the period about Asian political activism. The women were often stereotypically seen as largely passive and docile. Yet, for instance, Asian women were at the forefront of a number of well-known industrial strikes, such as the strike at Grunwick, and we know all that, with Jayaben Desai at its helm. In Southall, women like Harbans Kaur Baines was exemplary in her activism in 1979. During 1979, about 10 of us formed Southall Black Sisters. We came together initially in 1978 as a group of Asian and African Caribbean heritage women to support those working with young women and girls who were experiencing intergenerational conflict and or coming under pressure from patriarchal practices such as forced marriage. Soon, however, we started to meet independently around gender equality and called ourselves Southall Black Sisters, using black as a political color, and we've actually had a discussion about that, rather than referring to the specific shade of skin. In this, we were guided by our shared experience of color-based racisms and the histories of colonialism and imperialism in which they were embedded. We were also attuned to the politics of class and heteronormativity, making connections across experiences of different axes of power. About political blackness, what I would like to say is actually what has already been said, which is that it's really about the context, the political context in which you organize around a particular axis. For us, it was important to organize around the signifier black. Today, it may be something different, but the key issue is not that it's just sort of something that we try to a label you attach to something, but it actually is something that has to be struggled around, and you come to use a particular label because you have actually constructed solidarities across differences. In the early years, we were primarily a political campaigning group, though we did work with lawyers to hold advice surgeries on issues of domestic violence, immigration control, housing, and so on at Southall Rights. We organized or supported a number of important campaigns. For instance, we supported workers at Chicks Confectionery Factory in Slough for recognition of their union. Strike action of the period was often in protest at low wages, poor working conditions, and sometimes victimization of union activists. It all sounds quite familiar even today in relation to conditions of employees in the gig economy. We campaigned against virginity tests, we talked about that earlier on, which were carried out on young Asian women arriving in Britain to get married. It was a government policy which was being used to verify the supposed authenticity of Asian marriages. It caused an outrage, and quite rightly so. We worked with the Southall Defence Campaign for justice for those who were arrested and charged during April 1979 events. In later years, SPS obtained a centre of their own, and work on violence against women became a priority. In the early years, we critiqued and took issue with the imagery and representation of women in religious epics through drama and storytelling. In later years, SBS were recently centrally involved with the Women Against Fundamentalism. Not against religion, but fundamentalism. I think that's an important distinction to make. One of the things this history does is to place gender equity and equality at the heart of social and political issues. Despite some gains over the decades, gender remains an aspect of structure and experience which continues to demand political attention, both within specific communities as well as society as a whole. Of course, gender works in and through other social divisions, such as those of class, racism, sexuality, heteronormativity, and disability. All these axes of power mutually impact on and influence one another. To talk about women, transgender, or non-binary formations of gender is not then a minority issue, I must stress that, but is at the center stage of human rights. Southall 79, as we have seen, was critically about fighting against racist and fascist. Today, the far right is organizing globally as we witness the atrocity in Christchurch, New Zealand, and everyday racism remains endemic. We need to fight against all racisms, be they color-based racisms, anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish racism, Islamophobia, and anti-Muslim racism. And we must fight against the far right. I mean, this whole session has been organized around fighting against racism and fascism, and I think that's very, very important today. That day, 40 years ago, we categorically refused the practices of hatred. We asserted that self-defense is no offense and articulated a strident politics of resistance and solidarity. We need that ever more today. All these things require robust and urgent responses so that we can work towards a diverse but united, more equal and just society. Thank you.